Today on No Mac, No Cheese, we're again looking at the menu settings for the Canon 40D. You'll see here, first one is the camera user setting. You can register, and the Canon has, the 40D has 3 custom modes that you can record your settings. This means if you're in aperture priority mode or P mode or shutter priority mode, it'll record things like your exposure compensation, your white balance, your ISO, what aperture you were set at or what shutter speed you were set at. So that way you have a quick way to get to settings that you use quite a bit. It's great when you're in a church, going from inside to outside, or when you can and cannot use a flash. Very nice feature that they added on. And then, of course, you can clear the settings. From here, you can also clear all your camera settings. Not really needed. And it tells you which firmware version. If you download an update from Canon, put it on the card, and you can update the firmware. Right now, I don't have one in there. Okay, the next setting is all the custom functions. This one's going to be the most in-depth. First segment here is all about exposure. Okay, so we go into the custom function exposure set menu here, and first thing is your exposure level increments. By default, it's 1/3 of a stop, which gives you the most control. If you don't think you need that much, you can go half stop increments as well. So your menus are down here. Okay, second one here, your exposure ISO speed setting increments. This can be adjusted in 1/3 stop or 1 stop ISO adjustments. I like using 1 stop. ISO expansion. This allows the camera to go up to ISO 3200. I like using this because I do a lot of low light weddings. The bracketing auto cancel means after you take your 3 shots, it'll automatically cancel the auto exposure bracketing. Next one here is the exposure bracketing sequence. By default, it starts with the normal exposure, then goes to the negative exposure comp, and then the positive exposure comp. You can also set it if you want it to go in a different order. You can go negative, 0, and positive. This is a nice feature, the exposure safety shift. What this does is if you're in shutter speed priority or aperture priority mode, if when you go to take the picture, it can't get the shutter speed fast enough or it can't get the aperture wide enough, it'll automatically adjust your shutter or aperture. In aperture priority mode, if you're set at 2.8 in a bright sunny day and it's taking the shutter speed over 1/8,000th of a second, which the camera cannot do, rather than overexposing your picture, it'll bump up your aperture so that it's able to get a good exposure. The flash sync in aperture priority mode, if you go with auto, it's going to drag the shutter so you can get some ambient light, or you can set it to a fixed shutter. I generally leave it on auto because if I want a fixed shutter speed, I'll turn it to manual mode. So I see no reason to use that one. Next custom function is image. It's only got 3 options here. Long exposure noise reduction. You can have it off, auto, or on. This will actually double the length of your exposure. If you shoot a 30-second exposure, it'll take another picture with the shutter closed so that it will be able to tell which pixels were hot and take those back out of the image. I don't do a lot of long exposures, so I keep it off. The high ISO speed noise reduction. If you're shooting a lot in low light, turning this on will get you some very good results. It does cost you a little bit of sharpness though. In the highlight tone priority mode, this is a great mode when you're in a very high contrast situation. By enabling this, you lose both ISO 100 and ISO 3200. The camera will only let you set it from 200 to 1600. Great mode to use when you're photographing something that's going to be pushing right up to that highlight edge. I turn this one on and off all the time. This next one here is the autofocus and drive modes. Lens drive when it can't find the focus. You can have it search, or you can have it automatically shut off. I let it search if it needs it. The autofocus, lens autofocus stop button. Some lenses come with an autofocus stop button. I don't have any of them, but if it does, you can actually tell it what you want it to do. The autofocus point selection method. Usually I only have one autofocus point selected at a time, and I use the multi-controller direct dial, which is this thumb button here, and this mode lets me just tap to the right and it'll use the autofocus point all the way on the right. Click in the center, it'll choose the center one. So this gives me a very fast way to adjust it. The other option is the quick controller dial, which is the thumb wheel, and the normal mode, which uses the finger wheel. Out of superimposed display, this is showing you the autofocus points in the camera. I leave it on. Autofocus assist firing. I have it enabled. I pretty much use it with whenever I use an external flash. Autofocus during live view shooting. This is when you're using the live view, you can press the autofocus on button, the mirror will flip down, it'll focus, then you can let go of the button. I see no reason to have that disabled. And the mirror lockup, if you want to absolutely sure that your camera doesn't move on a tripod from the mirror bouncing back and forth, you can enable that. And the last one here is this operation and all the other functions. This is the shutter button and autofocus on button. By default it turns on the metering and starts the autofocus. I've actually set it here to auto exposure locking and metering plus the autofocus start. So that's going to let me control the exposure metering with my finger and the focusing with my thumb. The autofocus on, the auto exposure lock button switch, it's comes standard disabled. I haven't had a reason to change that. Set button when shooting, you can change it, have it change to do whatever you want. I actually set it for menu display so I can adjust my white balance quickly. Dial direction during shutter speed and aperture priority. Normal is to the right, means it's going positive, to the left is going negative at the top of the wheel and at the finger wheel. Nikon's is backwards from that, so if you're coming from a Nikon shooter, you can actually set that to reverse direction. The 40D actually has several focusing screens you can use. The default one, the one that came with your camera, is an EFA. Also available in an EFD and an EFS. If you purchase a new focusing screen, make sure you select the right one. Add original decision data. Again, this is all put in the raw file, so I leave that off. And the live view exposure simulation. So I let the LCD auto adjust so I can see as much detail in it as I can. Here you can clear all your custom functions. And the next one here is My Menu. This is something that you may or may not be used to. You can put your favorite things that you access on a regular basis into your own menu. To do that, you go to My Menu Settings down at the bottom, and you'd hit Register. Right now it's not going to let me register anything else because I'm full, but you can go through here and you can see everything that it's that you can register there. Then you can sort things, delete them. So a lot of things that I use. So that's the menu system for the Canon 40D. Feel free to get out your manual, take a look at it if you don't have this camera, but a lot of them should be very similar. All right, see you next time.